Yep.
So
We're
it's
officially at the
up
7 o'clock hour.
yeah. So we are officially starting and we're going to introduce ourselves. So I'm Mira Rubin. Scott.
I'm Scott Billy, and together we're Sustainability Now.
Now. We didn't even practice that. And so so many of you are new here this evening. We're just going to give you a little bit of background about who we are. We started Sustainability Now about, is it 6 years ago now, Scott? Five,
About
six?
5.5, yeah. We forgot to have our 5-year anniversary celebration, so maybe we'll have a 6 year.
And so our mission is to bring forward sustainability, information and awareness around sustainability in a wide variety of pillars, including food, fuel, energy, housing, economics, and consciousness, just to name a few. And by crossing the spectrum of different sustainability arenas, we're trying to stimulate conversation and communication across these silos so that we can all collaborate more effectively together. So Scott, any additions there?
Yeah. And so basically, we started as a podcast. And at the beginning of COVID lockdown, we started doing a live Zoom event every Thursday night, which has since evolved into what we affectionately refer to as movie night, where we'll either premiere one of our upcoming podcast episodes, like tonight, the presentation that Doug did for us, which we'll be posting live on all of our systems after we're done here. And then other times we'll show movies and documentaries, other information that's put together by other organizations. The goal of these events was to get people together, talking, collaborating, and coming up with solutions that we can all do to help each other, further. Our whole motto is shaping a world that works. So working together, we can make that happen. So traditionally, these nights are a lot more conversational because the group is a little smaller, or much smaller. And tonight we've set it up because there's so many, it would be just chaos to try to have a conversation. So we've set it up more like a webinar tonight, where we're asking everyone to pop your questions into the Q&A and feel free to talk amongst yourselves. We often see that while talk amongst yourselves in the chat box instead. So a lot of times during our pre-recorded portions, people get inspired to share information about whatever. That's the place. The chat is the place for that. And then if you've got something for Doug for afterwards, pop that into the Q&A.
Also, there is an option for closed captioning, and it's active now. So if you wanted to be able to see it, how I'm looking to see how would people turn it on, Scott?
It's under more. Yeah, it's under more, and at least on desktop, there's 3 dots that say more underneath them, and captions is one of the choices there. I'm not sure where it lives on the phone.
Yeah. And so also we're anticipating quite a number of questions. If you're interested in monitoring the questions, I believe you can see them in the Q&A module, and you have the opportunity to upvote questions that are of particular interest. Everybody just gets one vote, but it'll help us to prioritize the questions that are going to be asked later. Okay.
Yep. So that's the little thumbs up liking it icon that you'll see in the Q&A box. So if you look in there and you see questions that you really want to know too, make sure you upvote them, and they'll rise to the top, and we'll work our way down the list based on number of upvotes.
And for the future, and we'll be mentioning this again this evening, you can find us anywhere that you would get a normal podcast. And you can also see our video podcasts. They're all video based, but you can see the video if you go to our YouTube channel or our website at sustainabilitynow.global instead of .com. Yep. Please stick around after, because Doug is going to be with us and a number of other people, part of his team, to be able to field questions. And oftentimes that's when like as Scott enjoys saying, that's when the magic happens. So we invite you please to plan to stay, and we go till 9 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Scott Billy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Billy. Today, I'll be your host for Sustainability Now. And today I'm joined by Dr. Doug Tallamy, a true champion of biodiversity. Renowned entomologist, author, and professor at the University of Delaware, his groundbreaking research has shed light on the critical role of native plants in sustaining our local ecosystems. With over 40 years of experience, Doug has become a leading voice in the field of conservation biology. He's published more than 100 scientific papers and has several books, including Nature's Best Hope. In this episode, we'll dive into Dr. Tallamy's research, his passion for conservation, and how each of us can play a role in preserving the natural world right in our own backyards. Welcome aboard, Doug.
Oh, thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I really want to talk about my idea of how we can stem the flow of biodiversity from our human-dominated landscapes, the idea we call Homegrown National Park. Before we do that, though, let's talk about what this creature is. It looks like a fecal sac that a bird has dropped. You know, when birds rear their young, they don't want their babies pooping in the nest, so the babies stick their rear up in the air and produce a fecal sac. The parents grab it and fly out from the nest and drop it. And this is what it looks like when it splats on a leaf. Well, it's not a fecal sac. It's actually a spider. If you look up close, there are the legs. And it's a bola spider, female bola spider, who at night, it actually does look like a spider. She hunts with a single strand of silk, one sticky glob of glue at the end there. You wouldn't think anything would fly in and get stuck on that, but they do. Moths fly in, get stuck on her silky glob. She rolls them around, wraps them up in silk very quickly, and feeds on them. And when she catches enough moths, she has enough energy, she can create an egg mass. That's what an egg mass looks like. It's a very finely woven silk with the eggs in the middle, and that's how they overwinter. But she'll go hunting again. And if she continues to catch moths, she'll make more than one egg mass. Well, why do moths fly into this little sticky glob here? It's not an accident. She's actually releasing the sex pheromone of particular species of moths. So the ones that fly in are males who think that she is a female moth. She's a female, but she's not a moth. Well, I was interested in which moths the bola spiders at my house were catching, so I unwrapped those bodies that she would cut loose and find out it's the bronze cutworm. And I have bronze cutworm adults at my house because I've got bronze cutworm larvae at my house, and I got bronze cutworms larvae because I've got goldenrod, which is their primary host plant. I also have this beautiful moth, the dot line white, because I've got oak trees, particularly white oaks, and because I don't rake the leaves away from underneath them. There's actually a dot line white cocoon in this pile of leaves here that you would never notice when you're raking. There it is right there. If you look up close, it blends right in. And this is one of the reasons we should leave the leaves on our property as much as we can, because there's an awful lot of creatures that are living in those leaves. I also have the evening primrose moth because I planted evening primrose specifically to attract that moth. The moth did come. It spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded in there, but it is always very cute. I've got the zebra swallowtail because I've got pawpaws. Again, we planted pawpaws at our house specifically to attract that beautiful butterfly. It would take me a long time to describe all the things that are now making a living on our property because we put the plants back, but it would not take me very long to describe what's happening in a typical residential landscape like this. There is no goldenrod, so there are no bronze cutworms, so there are no bola spiders. There are no oak trees, so there's no dot line whites. There are no evening primroses, so there's no evening primrose moths. There are no pawpaws, so there's no zebra swallowtail. Very little can live on a typical residential landscape in this country, and there are 135 million acres of typical residential landscapes in the U.S. And that's why the headlines are pretty scary these days. Like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. It's a third of our bird population already gone. The Earth has lost 2/3 of its wildlife since 1970. Terrible statistic. The UN says we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. 40% of the Earth's plants face extinction. Some really bad news. And that's why Elizabeth Kolbert gets to write The Sixth Extinction, talking about the sixth great extinction event that this planet has ever experienced. It is underway, but this is the first one that has been caused by one of those species, and that happens to be us. So the news is so bad these days that people are actually studying what our reactions is to all of these bad headlines. And one of the people who's studying that is Richard Hobbs. And he says that, our reaction to bad news about biodiversity is very similar to the 5 stages of grief that we experience once we hear we have a terminal disease. There's denial, and there's certainly a lot of denial out there. A lot of people say, well, we don't have a problem at all. That's very easy to do. Anger, a lot of people get angry, including me. Bargaining, what can we do to make it better? Depression, that's pretty easy to slip into. Then the final stage, stage 5, is acceptance. And this is where I'm going to push back, because acceptance is the same thing as giving up. And giving up's not an option, folks. Nature's not optional. So we need a 6th stage. And I'm going to propose action, where we actually do something that will prevent this from happening any more than it's already happening. Now, we do have national parks that were established primarily to preserve their beautiful scenery, their wonderful places. As a matter of fact, Teddy Roosevelt, who was instrumental in expanding the national park system, says this: the establishment in the National Park Service is justified by considerations of good administration. So Teddy was patting himself on the back, and he should have. Of the value of natural beauty as a national asset, and the effectiveness of outdoor life and recreation in the production of good citizenship. In other words, our parks and our preserves were created primarily because they're pretty places for us to play in. They were not created with conservation in mind. And that might be one of the reasons we only have 3.6% of the US in the national park system. Only 12% is federally protected, which means 88% is not. And what's happening in that 88% is actually appalling. You've heard some of these statistics. Every 30 seconds, a football field worth of America's natural areas disappears to development. Development, certainly the most oxymoronic word in all of ecology. 44 million acres of lawn these days. That's an area bigger than the size of New England. We have paved over an area larger than Ohio, and that statistic is more than 15 years old, so who knows how much it is now. 2 million acres of golf courses. That's an area larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined, dedicated to golf. And people ask, well, why aren't the parks and the preserves that we have enough to sustain the biodiversity that humans need? Remember, it is biodiversity that keeps us alive on this planet. And there's several answers to that, but the most important one is that these parks are too small. When you take a large area like this and shrink it down into a little park system, this is an exaggeration. You're taking large populations and shrinking them down to small or tiny populations. And that is the problem. Tiny populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. Why? Because all populations fluctuate. In good times, they go up. Bad times, they go down. If you're a large population, this top line here, even in your down cycle, there's enough individuals that you can increase quickly when times get better. But if you're a tiny population, often in your down cycle, you hit 0. You blink out of your little habitat patch. And unless you recolonize after that, which is very difficult these days, because our parks and preserves are so isolated from each other, then you're permanently gone. That's called local extinction. And it turns out that studies all over the planet, and some of them quite long, 100 years in length, are telling us the same thing. The natural areas that we've left on the planet are not long enough to sustain the amount of nature that we need to produce the ecosystem services that keep us alive. Now, we tend to use extinction as a metric of trouble. But I don't think that's a good idea. That's like going to the doctor after you're dead. It's not gonna do much help. I think we need to look instead at as a signal of a problem when common species become rare, when the abundance of species that are running our ecosystem starts to decrease. This, for example, is a picture of the American chestnut. Used to be the dominant tree from Maine all the way down to Georgia along the crest of the Appalachians. It's not extinct, but it's functionally extinct. It was terminated in large part by the chestnut blight. And there are now a few sprouts out there here and there, but it's no longer performing the role in its ecosystem that it once did. So functional extinction. Same thing with the rusty patch bumblebee. Just a few years ago, it was one of those common bumblebees on the planet. It is now, if you find a rusty patch bumblebee, it's big news. Not extinct, but there's so few of them, they're not performing their role that they used to, so it is functionally extinct. Same story for the beaver. Beavers were common, very common back when Europeans came to this country. They established the hydrology. They determined what the hydrology of the entire country was by creating marshes and damming up streams and rivers, keeping that water table very high. Then they were largely trapped out. Now the beavers are, coming back in some places, but they're not nearly at the densities they used to be. And the hydrology of the entire country is changed because of it. So we're really talking about defaunation rather than extinction as being the problem. The reduction in the abundance of particularly common species. It's local. Think about the number of species that are in your yard right now compared to what was there before it was your yard. It's everywhere. And we tend not to even notice it, believe it or not. We don't notice it because of a phenomenon called shifting baseline. We tend to think that the way things were when we were children is the way they have always been and the way they ought to be. For example, none of us missed the passenger pigeon because it was extinct before any of us were born. It used to be the most common, the most abundant bird on the entire planet, but gone long ago. And that is true for a number of creatures. So shifting baseline means that we are losing the biodiversity that sustains us without even noticing it. What shall we do? Well, the good news is that even the highest levels of government are starting to notice this. The UN, for example, had a special meeting in Montreal last year to talk about what are we going to do about the loss of biodiversity on this planet. But you know what the UN does? They talk about making resolutions. And they talk very slowly. This was a headline from that meeting. Crucial negotiations to protect biodiversity are moving at a snail's pace. We are negotiating whether we're going to protect the stuff that keeps us alive on this planet. So I wish the UN luck. They can make a resolution, but I'm not sure it's going to make the difference. E.O. Wilson, a very famous biologist, entomologist at Harvard. He died the day after Christmas 2 years ago. He was concerned about the loss of species throughout his entire career. And in 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And he had one simple message. If we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we have to save nature. We have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it's going to disappear everywhere. And that includes humans. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that very bold statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, this sounds like a great idea. We'll just put half the Earth aside, and all those things that are struggling can be in that half, and we will be in the other half. Problem is, half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and I don't see that changing. And we've got 8 billion people in the other half, along with all of our hardscape, our roadways and airports and detritus. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we actually do this? Well, I think we can realize E.O. Wilson's dream of half Earth, but we need a new approach to conservation to do that. We've got to give up the idea that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. What I want to argue today is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. So we're not just going to practice conservation here, we're going to practice it over here, which means we've got to move beyond conservation. We've got to move into restoration. We've got to put nature back. And that means we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, but thrive. Fragmentation has been noted as one of the serious problems. We do have viable habitat out there, but they're tiny little places that are separated from each other. So the proposal is that we build biological corridors where we connect those places so that plants and animals can move back and forth between these viable habitats. It sounds good, and it's certainly better than nothing. But remember, the viable habitats will still be small. They'll still be tiny, which means the populations will still be tiny. And when they fluctuate, they'll still have the high probability of disappearing. So I think we need to go beyond building biological corridors and build actual viable habitat outside of these parks and preserves. This is good. This is even better. So the lighter areas would be where our cities and our farms are, but we need to build viable habitat by putting the plants back where we humans live, where we work, where we play. In order to achieve that, though, we need a new attitude about property rights. Remember, the land outside of our parks is mostly privately owned. And we have this idea that we get to do whatever we want with our private property. Our little piece of the earth is ours, and it's our right to do whatever we want. But remember, our yards are not like Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We all know that. But what happens on our yards does not stay on our yard. Our yards are part of local ecosystems. So whatever happens on our yard impacts that entire ecosystem. Let's just look at our decisions about lawn and see how that impacts the ecosystem function, the life around us. The amount of lawn we have is going to determine whether rain infiltrates when it rains hard or whether it leaves a stormwater runoff. It's going to determine how many pollutants we're adding to the watershed, how much nitrogen and phosphorus and herbicides and insecticides are leaving our yard and going into the local streams and rivers. It's also going to determine how much carbon we are adding to the atmosphere on this space. Remember, every time you mow your yard, you're pumping carbon into the air. It's going to determine how well we're supporting pollinators or whether we're eliminating the resources that they actually need. The plants we put on our yard are going to determine how much carbon we're storing on our property, how much we're pulling out. That's what plants do. They build their tissues out of carbon that they pulled out of the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And then they also pump that carbon into the ground through their root systems. As a matter of fact, 40% of the carbon harnessed by plants is pumped into the ground for long-term storage. That only happens if you have the plants there. The plant choices we use for our yards are going to determine whether we're harboring ecological tumors like an invasive Callery pear or many of the other invasive ornamentals we have that then escape our yard and push out the native plants that actually are supporting our ecosystems. In fact, plant choice is going to determine whether we are creating a viable food web, whether the plants we have in our yards are going to support the insects that the birds need to feed themselves. In short, how we landscape is going to help determine how much life Earth can sustain. It's going to determine the carrying capacity of the planet. And that is an awesome responsibility. It's an awesome responsibility that most homeowners do not know they have. But it also creates a grassroots solution to the biodiversity crisis. There's a lot of us out there, and a lot of us own private property. So that can create an army that can address this issue if we get that message out. Most of the country is privately owned. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. 85.6% east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So collectively, property owners that are owning all that property are now the hope and the future of conservation. And I believe we can mobilize them if we get this message to them. Let's return to lawn. It is the low-hanging fruit, the thing that we can manipulate the easiest. And again, we've got 44 million acres of lawn nationwide. And it's dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Why do we do that? Well, lawn is a status symbol. We're not going to give up our status symbols. We also need to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we cut the area of lawn in half? What if let's make the math simple. Let's say we got 40 million acres of lawn and we cut that area in half by restoring 20 million of those acres. That's enough land to create what I'm calling a new national park. We do it right at home, so we can call it Homegrown National Park. And it'll be big. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all this park, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. I had this idea when I heard about that 40 million acres in lawn figure back in, I think it was 2006, something like that. I started talking about it in my talks, but it wasn't until I wrote Nature's Best Hope that I included an entire chapter about Homegrown National Park. So I talked about it, I wrote about it, but I didn't actually create Homegrown National Park. It wasn't until I met Michelle Alfandari, who was a had a licensing career, marketing career in Manhattan. And she saw one of my talks and said, you know, you're not reaching your target audience. You're not reaching the non-choir. And I said, yeah, well, it's only the choir that invites me to give talks. And, you know, I knew that in order to reach that non-choir, you need to use social media and all kinds of fancy communicating mechanisms these days. And I said, I don't do that. And she said, well, I do that. Let's team up and form a nonprofit and get that message out. And that's what we've done. So we created homegrownnationalpark.org. The object is that you join Homegrown National Park for free. Doesn't cost anything. You register your property on the map, so where it is, and then the amount of area you're going to start to be a good steward of. Maybe you really are going to cut your area of lawn in half. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. Doesn't matter how small an area you're going to restore, but you put that area in the database, and then your little piece of your county is going to light up. You get to see who else has joined the Homegrown National Park near where you live. And the object, of course, is to get the entire country to light up. So here are our existing national parks. We want to turn this into this. That's the goal. So what are we asking? We really are asking people to reduce the area of lawn. Our yards are have very important ecological roles, and lawn doesn't accomplish any of those. We're going to replace some of that lawn with the native plants that do accomplish those important goals. We want to remove invasive species from our properties. Most people do have invasive plants on their property, and they don't even know it. And if our properties are protecting any natural areas, we certainly want to continue to do that. There are important ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park, and one is a significant increase in biodiversity. I'll give you some good examples of that in a few minutes. Measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants that are just on their property, and we own 78% of the country in private property, we'd be 78% done. If we replace lawn with plants that actually do sequester carbon dioxide, pump it into the ground, there will be a significant drawdown of atmospheric CO2. So joining Homegrown National Park will actually help fight climate change. And we're going to start to create viable habitat outside of parks and preserves. Every bit of conservation we do outside of a park helps conservation inside that park. Important sociological products associated with Homegrown National Park. National awareness, not just of what the problem is, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We're trying to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not just there for our entertainment. And it's something everybody needs, which means it's everybody's responsibility to sustaining it. We're trying to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action's even better. And finally, we want to merge all of the existing conservation efforts like Audubon and National Wildlife Federation, Wild Ones, Land Conservancies, all over the country. We want to merge all of their conservation efforts onto a single map so that we have a good measure of the amount of area that is being conserved on private property. Remember, we've got the 30-30 initiative. We're going to save 30% of the US by 2030, not unless we record conservation that's happening on private property. So those are the goals of Homegrown National Park. How are we doing? Well, last time I asked, we had 34,000 members. We have preserved 111,000 acres. New Jersey is doing okay, number 3 with 16,000 acres. You can look and see what your state, how your state ranks. So there's actually competition among states who's going to save the most land. There is urgency to enacting the Homegrown National Park solution, though. And remember that 135 million acres of residential landscape, big job. It's a big job. So we all need to get to work. And that means we all need to be on the same page about what we have to do. There are certain things we all have to be familiar with. And what we need to know is what our property should be doing. 4 things. All properties should be supporting viable food webs, picking plants that actually pass on their energy so that you have animals that can live on your property and then have a viable ecosystem. All properties need to sequester carbon to help climate change. All properties they all exist within a watershed, so we all need to manage that watershed responsibly. And all properties need to support pollinators. Lawn, of course, accomplishes none of those goals, which is why we're focusing on lawn in the beginning. It's easy to reduce the area of lawn. We also have to learn how important plant choice is. In the past, we have chosen our plants with one thing in mind, and that is how pretty they are. Now we have to choose our plants with 2 things in mind. How pretty are they, and how well do they function in our local ecosystems? And that means we've got to focus on native plants. There are 3 kinds of plants that are out there. Plants that contribute energy to local food webs. So plants are capturing energy from the sun, turning it into food through photosynthesis, and then passing it on so that you have a viable food web and a viable ecosystem. Those are the contributors. You also have non-contributors. Those are plants that capture energy, make food, but they don't pass it on. It stays within the plant. And then there are plants that actively remove energy from local ecosystems. Best example of a contributor would be one of the oaks. Across the country, in 84% of the counties in which they occur, oaks are transferring more energy up the food web than any other plant genus. A good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo biloba from Asia. Nice ornamental plant. It's non-invasive, it's not moving around, but nothing eats a ginkgo. So it's there, but it's not contributing energy to your local food web. And a good example of a detractor would be any of the invasive ornamentals that escape our yards, push out the native plants that are contributing and replace it with a plant that's not. And a good example of that would be bamboo. We also need to appreciate how important caterpillars are in local food webs. Now, they used to be, as gardeners, they used to be our enemy. Make sure you kill all the caterpillars. But it turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we're going to have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. And that is why plants that I call keystone plants are essential, because they are supporting more caterpillars than any other type of plant. Remember what a keystone is. It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch. And if you take that stone out of the arch collapses. Well, it turns out that just 14% of our native plants are supporting 90% of the caterpillars that are out there. They're creating 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. Those are the keystone plants that I'm talking about. So think about the keystone plants and the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that are going to hold up that house. They're the support system. You cannot hold up that house without them. We can't build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last century. How do you find out what the keystone plants are where you live? You go to Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of the most important woody plant genera and herbaceous plant genera in your county will pop up. We also have to remember all those wonderful things that E.O. Wilson told us, like insects are the little things that run the world. And if they disappear, lots of very nasty things will happen. And we have to accept that 90% of those insects that are running the world, the ones that eat plants, are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants, the ones for which they have adaptations that allow them to get around the plant defenses. And that takes a long period of evolutionary history with those plants. And once they develop those adaptations, they are locked into eating that plant. Let's use the monarch butterfly as an example. Most people know that monarchs require milkweeds. They're beautiful butterflies. We want to save them, and they are host plant specialists on milkweeds. That is their only host plant. But milkweeds are toxic plants. How can monarchs eat toxic plants? that are protected by cardiac glycosides and also milky latex sap. When you break open a milkweed leaf, all this white goo comes out. If that gets on the mouth parts of a caterpillar, it dries and gums them up and glues their mouth shut. Well, it turns out that monarchs have the adaptations necessary to get around those plant defenses. They have specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those cardiac glycosides. They have behavioral adaptations that minimize the caterpillar's exposure to the sticky latex sap. And that is what allows the monarch to coexist with, not just coexist, but to be able to utilize the nutrients that are in milkweeds. Remember, monarchs are not exceptions. 90% of the insects that eat plants have specialized relationships with the plants they eat, just like the monarch. So if we take those plants away, we lose those insects. We also have to internalize how important pollinators are. And I'm not just talking about the non-native honeybee. And we're doing pretty well with this. We hear a lot about how we need pollinators because they pollinate a third of our crops. Well, we need pollinators everywhere, not just in our crops. It's not a third of our crops. It's actually 1/12 of our crops. And I hear people say, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. I don't like the crop argument. We need pollinators because they're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lose our pollinators, we're going to lose 80% to 90% of the plants on the planet, and that simply is not an option. We want to realize how important leaves are. The fallen leaves in the fall, call them leaf litter. Gene Ponzi in St. Louis suggests we call them leaf largesse because they do such important things. The nutrients that our trees used that previous year are locked up in these leaves. We have to return those nutrients to the ground so the tree can use it again. That means the leaves have to stay there until they decay. The nutrients are incorporated into the soil by all the organisms that live in the ground. There are more species that live in the ground than above the ground. Most of them are what we call detritivores. They're eating these leaves, returning the nutrients to the soil. And then we got all the mycorrhizal fungal associations that transfer those nutrients to the plants so they can use them again. When we rake leaves away, we're losing all of those ecosystem services. The leaves are also providing the moisture required by those soil organisms. When we rake leaves away, then the soil is bare and dries out, and the soil community is killed. People worry, well, I can't keep the leaves on I certainly can't keep them on my lawn, and if I put them in my flower beds, they're going to prevent plants from growing, but they actually don't. And I'm not saying pile your leaves 5 feet thick, but a normal layer of leaf litter allows those plants to get through just fine. Give it a chance. We have to appreciate what our light pollution, the security lights we use at night, what's that doing to local biodiversity, particularly nocturnal insects. Light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines at night because insects are attracted to these lights, they fly around and they die. But here's an easy solution. All we have to do is take the white bulbs out of our security lights and replace them with yellow bulbs. And if we do that, that's because nocturnal insects are far less attracted to yellow wavelengths. So if we replace our white bulbs with yellow bulbs, overnight we would save millions of insects. And if we use yellow LED lights, we'd save millions of dollars as well. Mosquito fogging. It's another scourge on the landscape. We've got to appreciate that there's a little false advertising going on here. First of all, this is the booming business around the country. Everybody wants to control their mosquitoes with these fogging companies. And they say it's okay because it's a natural product that they're fogging. And it is a natural product. It's pyrethroids, but it's industrial strength pyrethroids. So it's pretty nasty stuff. And being natural doesn't mean much to me. Cyanide is natural. Ricin is natural. Nature produces some really nasty things. So they also say it only kills mosquitoes. And that's not even close to true. It kills all of the pollinators we're trying to save there. It kills the monarchs. This is a result of a mosquito fogging operation on the eastern shore of Maryland. There's no way you can kill mosquitoes without killing all the other insects. The interesting thing is it does not control mosquitoes. So we're doing this for nothing. Actually, not for nothing. It costs a lot of money to do it. It's very difficult to control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You have to kill 90% of them to control them in the adult stage. And these guys kill between 10 and 50%. The real way to control mosquitoes is in the larval stage, and we can do it with biological control, a product called mosquito dunks. That's Bacillus thuringiensis that only kills aquatic diptera. So what you want to do is get the mosquitoes to lay their eggs in a bucket. Get the bucket and fill it full of water and put a handful of straw or hay in there and let it ferment in the sunlight for a few days. It'll build up populations of diatoms and algae, and that becomes an irresistible brew. That's what mosquito larvae eat, diatoms and algae. So the female mosquitoes in your yard will lay their eggs in your bucket. Then you go to the hardware store and get a sheet of mosquito dunks. That's $12, and put a mosquito dunk in your bucket. Again, it is a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera, and the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is a mosquito larva. So it's targeted, it's cheap, and if everybody did it, it would help a lot. We should appreciate how important small properties are. You don't have to own 30 acres in order to be an effective part of the future of conservation. This is Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. It's 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size. It's beautiful because she has landscaped it with native plants very attractively. And she's recorded 124 bird species that have used her yard since she put in these native plants. And that includes people that don't even have properties at all. They can do container gardening. 82% of us live in cities right now. So that's a lot of people live in apartment complexes or places with very, very tiny yards. But put in the right plants and they can be effective sources of food for pollinators, for those migrating monarchs. And if everybody did this, again, it would turn those barren bricks into valuable resources. Now, fortunately, we do have a silver bullet in our fight against climate change and biodiversity crisis. We can fight both of these things at the same time, and that is that conservation works. Nature is extremely resilient, but we've got to give her a chance. Few examples. This is the Nachusa grasslands, 3,800 acres in Illinois. There are 730 native plant species that are living there now. 180 species of birds have been recorded there. It wasn't long ago that it was a cornfield. So we can revive these systems if we get serious about it. This is what's happened at our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania, where my wife Cindy and I live. We have 10 acres of a farm that was sold off back in the year 2000 in 10-acre lots. It had been mowed for hay before they sold it off. And when you mow for hay, we live in Southeast Pennsylvania, what you're really mowing is the rootstocks of all the invasive plants that are out there. So multiflora rose and Oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle and miscanthus and porcelain berry, all those things are being mowed. And when you stop mowing, that's what comes back. So this is what our property looked like, 10 acres of Asian vines and shrubs that have escaped from our garden, from our gardens. So our job was to remove this. And it's not that hard, especially if you get your wife to do it. That's Cindy out there working hard. I shouldn't minimize it. It is a lot of work, but you can do it. Cindy did it practically alone, and that's what our property looks like, taken from the same perspective today, because we put some of the plants back, not all of them, still working on it. But my research has shown that if you know the number of species of moths in your local food web, you have a good index of how productive that food web is and how stable that food web is. So for the last 6 years, I've been taking pictures of moths at our house, and I'm up to 1,243 species of moths that have come back to this piece of the earth because we put the plants back. These are interesting things like the chinkapin leaf miner, the skullcap skeletonizer, the neighbor, they've got great names, the little devil, the horrid zale, the forgotten frigid owlet, the scallop sallow, the obtuse yellow, the explicit arches, the snowy shouldered aclaris, the grateful midget, the morbid owlet, the pink shaded fern moth, the feeble grass moth, the scribbler, lemon plagotis, the showy emerald, the green marvel, Harris's three-spot, the old wife underwing, the eyed pectes, the tufted bird dropping moth. Who wouldn't want the tufted bird dropping moth at their house? The hog sphinx, beautiful creature. This is one of my favorite, the spun glass caterpillar, and hundreds more species of moths and their caterpillars have come back to the plants on our property because we put those plants there. They wouldn't be here if we didn't have them. And when I tell that story, people say, well, how come you have any plants at all? How come those caterpillars haven't eaten all the plants on your property? Because we also have the things that eat those caterpillars, like birds. We've got 62 species of birds that have bred on our property. We've recorded them, and they eat hundreds of caterpillars a day, thousands of caterpillars to get one nest of those birds to the point where they fledge. We also have lots of insect predators out there. We've got ambush bugs. We've got assassin bugs. We've got predatory stink bugs. Here's one that sat next to this aggregation of milkweed tussock moth, and it ate one a day, and there were fewer by the time they matured. Lots of hymenopteran parasitoids. These are wasps that lay their eggs in caterpillars. Lots, hundreds of species of them. And this is a result. This is a Pandora sphinx caterpillar where the parasitoids, it's a Briconid, it's a family of parasitic wasps, have already eaten out the insides of this creature. Then they tunnel through its exoskeleton. They spin a cocoon. People think those are eggs, but that's really the cocoon of those parasitoids. And these guys have already emerged. So this one caterpillar produced, 20, 30 parasitoids. Very common on our property. And then we also have predatory wasps. So this wasp has stung this caterpillar. So it's paralyzed. It's not dead. Then it flies off, puts it in its nest, and it lays an egg on it. That is nature's form of refrigeration. If it had killed the caterpillar would rot before that egg even hatched. But it keeps it alive by paralyzing it. Then the egg of the wasp hatches, and it eats the caterpillar alive. And we have vertebrates that eat lots of insects too. We have skunks, we have possums, we have raccoons, we have red foxes. 25% of a fox's diet is insects. And we've got lots of amphibians too. We've got tree frogs, we've got toads, we've got salamanders, we've got ringneck snakes. These are all insect eaters, and the cutest little gray tree frogs that you've ever seen. They're green when they're little. And of course, lots of other things. So moving on, that was the story of the lawn, but our lawn goals are too modest because most of the private property that's out there is not in lawn. It's in woodlots, cropland, or rangeland. So we have to deal with them as well in Homegrown National Park. As a matter of fact, there are 406 million acres in woodlots that are managed by private citizens, not logging companies, just in the US alone. And how they are managed is going to determine their biodiversity value. And by managed, I mean, these areas are logged, but how do we do that? And how do we maintain the invasive species load? Well, there are organizations now that are dedicated to sustainable forestry, such as the Foundation for Sustainable Forests in Western Pennsylvania will tell you exactly how you can manage your woodlot. There's two kinds of woodlot management: high-grade harvesting and worst first managing. High-grade harvesting, where you take the very best trees and then you leave the rest, that provides you a good harvest once, and then you got to wait about 80 years for another one. Worst first selection leaves the best trees. You take smaller, more frequent harvests, and that leads to sustained yields over time indefinitely. You never actually destroy the forest. But we also have to manage the invasive species that are in our woodlots, and most of them are choked with invasive species, taking up to a third of the vegetation with plants largely from Asia. And in order to manage our invasive species, we have to manage our deer. We have overabundance of deer across the US, particularly in the East. They're really wreaking havoc. These guys like native plants just like insects do, and they leave the non-natives alone. So it changes the competitive value or the competitive edge that the non-natives have. Everybody thinks the non-natives are such competitive plants. They're just like any other plant. If you cage out the deer, it turns out our native plants are much better competitors than we thought. You know, when the baby oak tree pops its head above the land there, if it's eaten by a deer, it doesn't get a chance to compete very well. This is what it looks like when you have deer, no understory there, no replacement for a forest. And this is what it looks like when you keep them out. This is a shot. I was in the Great Smoky Mountains this spring. That's what a healthy forest looks like. That's understory. And these understory plants are largely young overstory trees. They are canopy trees waiting for a chance to grow up. And I was interested, how come it looks like this? Why aren't the deer over browsing the Smoky Mountains? I thought they had a really neat management plan. They said, we don't manage at all, and we don't have too many deer. Why don't we have too many deer? Well, they do have black bears, they have bobcats, and they have coyotes. And those three working together, they don't have wolves, that would help a lot, but those three working together are enough to keep the deer populations below the point where they destroy the forest. There's another serious downside to deer overabundance, and that, of course, is Lyme disease. We have Lyme disease because the deer are an important component of the black-legged tick, the deer tick life cycle. They actually mate on deer. So if you have an abundance of deer, you're going to have Lyme disease. How do we control deer? We can't spend a lot of time on this, but the predators will work if we put them back. We can hire sharpshooters, very expensive. They'll come in, they'll shoot maybe half the deer, and it sounds like a lot, but it's never enough. And you got to have them back and back and back. Bern Blossy at Cornell is proposing market hunting, where you actually pay people for every deer that they harvest. And no season. We're trying to control the deer numbers. So this is probably the one that's going to work if we ever get serious about deer control. What do you do in the meantime? I put a cage around the plants that I want to keep. So any oak tree, for example, that I want to plant on my property has got to be caged or it'll be killed. Cropland, we've got a lot of area in cropland. 410 million acres of the U.S. are now in some form of cropland. That's the light green area here. And you might think, well, there's nothing we can do to crops to increase its biodiversity value, but that is not true. There's a lot of things we can do. We can manage the roadsides properly. We can put back hedgerows any place that's possible to do that. Add prairie strips and minimize our use of neonicotinoid insecticides. The reason we have lost the monarch, the reason it is now red listed, the reason I've only seen 2 this entire summer is because we have taken away the area where the milkweeds and the asters and the goldenrod and all the things that supported monarch used to be. We called them weeds. We sprayed Roundup right up to the road, and we replaced it with lawn. This is now the agricultural ethic across the country, which means and that's why we've got a loss of native bees as well. We've replaced productive, tiny little ecosystems on thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of roadsides in our agricultural areas with lawn that has to be mowed. But we can put it back. People are putting it back. Iowa is working very hard on putting prairie ecosystems back along roadsides. If we do that, we can save the monarch. If we don't do that, we will not save the monarch. Put our hedgerows back. We took out hedgerows because they interfered with large machinery, and then we just went crazy about it. We took out hedgerows that didn't need to be removed. But not only should we put them back, we need to make sure that they are comprised of native species. We did a study at the University of Delaware comparing the caterpillar populations in hedgerows that are invaded by non-native plants. So here's autumn olive and multiflora rose and lots of other things, and compared it with hedgerows that are not invaded by Asian plants, and found that when they're invaded, they reduced caterpillar populations by 68%, the number of species, the abundance of those caterpillars by 91%, and they reduced the biomass of those caterpillars, the actual weight, the actual amount of energy in those hedgerows by 96%. In other words, when you allow your hedgerows to be invaded by non-native plants, you reduce the amount of bird food by 96%. Prairie strips, wonderful idea. Put these prairie strips right through the corn, right through the soybeans, and put them perpendicular to the flow of water off the landscape. So they intercept soil, the topsoil that we're losing from our farmland, and also all the pollutants that we're adding to our watershed. So not only is it a wonderful place for those pollinators we're trying to support, but it reduces topsoil loss by 95%, reduces water pollution by 90%, and you get USDA CRP funding. You get support. The grower is not losing any productivity at all. He's actually paid to do this. It's a win-win for everybody. Then finally, minimizing neonicotinoid insecticides that are 7,000 times more toxic to insects than DDT was. That's the pink stuff that's on the seeds that you plant. Seed coatings. Only 5% of that product is taken up by the plant. The other 95% washes off into the watershed or blows away on dust, where it's extremely stable, stays there for a long, long time. What's interesting is we're using it preventively. In other words, whether or not you have an insect problem, we're loading the landscape with neonicotinoid seed coatings. And when you compare yield in a crop where you've used seed coatings with yield in that same crop where you don't use seed coatings, you don't get any increase in yield. We're using them for nothing. Rangeland. Most of the land is actually in rangeland. 770 million acres of the U.S. is in rangeland. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas, dedicated to cattle. But it can be, we can graze our grasslands productively. All grasslands co-evolved with grazers. So we've gotten rid of the bison, but we can put cattle there. And we can do it sustainably. This is an experimental range in Nebraska. All the yellow you see here, those are sunflowers. These are cattle, they're not bison. So if you don't overgraze, you can have a productive landscape. Put the beavers back. The terrible problem with rangeland degradation, particularly in the Southwest, has come from not necessarily from overgrazing. They do overgraze, but it's really come from eliminating the beavers. When you eliminate beavers, all of the waterways become channelized, which these deep cuts in size into the landscape lowers the water table. Now, beavers used to dam this, and the water table was right up here, which made marshland, and it kept a lot more water on the landscape. So if you put in either the beavers back to raise that water table, or put beaver analog dams in there. We essentially build beaver dams ourselves. We can restore a lot of those wetlands. But finally, you have to keep the cows out of those wetlands, out of the streams themselves, where they eat the willows and they eat the cottonwoods, and those are the major supporters of biodiversity in our rangelands. Okay, there's something that's common to each one of these conservation approaches. And that is whether or not they work, whether or not they succeed, depends on decisions that you and I make. They become not a scientific problem, but a sociological problem. I had a student a few years ago who wrote this on a test. While conservationists claim to be managing species and habitats, what we are really managing is people. And that is so true. So we really are talking about changing the culture at Homegrown National Park. We want to change it from an adversarial relationship with nature we've had for so long to a collaborative one. We have to work with nature if we're going to persist on this planet. And the real question is, can we do this? And I say, of course we can do it. You don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. So many people right now are concerned about what's happening on the planet, but they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can modify your light system. One person can add a pollinator garden, remove invasive plants from your property, add those keystone plants, fire your mosquito fogger, join Homegrown National Park. Lots of things a single person can do and totally turn around the ecological productivity of their property, and then enhance their local ecosystem instead of continuing to degrade it. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just think about the piece of the planet that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Volunteer for a land conservancy, park, or preserve. They're all understaffed. They're all underfunded. They'll love you as a volunteer. So we hope that Homegrown National Park will provide the motivation and the guidance for millions of us to tackle these conservation challenges. Whether or not we do so today is going to determine nature's fate in the future, and then ultimately our own. So please get on the map. Thanks very much.
Wow, that was awesome. Thanks, Doug. You really made my job easy today.
Well, now it's your turn. You've got to spread this nationwide. So
we will definitely do that. And one of the things, as you're closing out there with logging on and getting on the site, are there more things to do beyond just tagging your property when you get onto Homegrown National Parks? Like, should you identify what types of restorations you've done, or what wildlife you're spotting, those kinds of things?
That's down the road.
Okay.
That requires a better web system than we have. Actually, building that map is really expensive. So these are features that we do want to add. And we've recently switched to a new IT company. But that's where most of the money of Homegrown National Park goes. And it's all from, it's donations. So we're restricted in what we can do with this map. But yes, we want not just to record the acreage, but the type of plant. And we also want to record the acreage of invasives that is removed.
Great. And you actually led me right into one of my other questions that came up as you were talking. You showed the list of keystone plants. Is there a companion list of top invasive species that should be the key targets for people to get rid of?
That changes as you move around the country. We do not have a county by county list of invasive species. That's a good idea. You can get it. You can Google invasives in whatever your county is, and it'll pop up right away. But we don't have a central site for that. Not a bad idea.
None of the conservancy sites or anything have done such a database.
They do it locally, but nobody's done it nationally that I know of.
Okay. Yeah, because I've been single-handedly going after all the invasives around me, and I want to make sure I'm getting all the right ones.
Well, it's hard to get a wrong one, but
That's true. And then the one other thing that came up, I had a question about the mosquito dunks. Is there a time of year that's the best to try that approach?
well, you want to do it when you got the most mosquitoes. So actually right now, this time of year, August and September, when you have peak mosquito populations pretty much everywhere in the country. Doing it early in the season, where I live, there's just very few mosquitoes. It's, it's cheap. So if you do it and there's no mosquitoes around, that's okay. But you really want to do it by the end of June. You want to have it up and going so that you keep the mosquito populations low. It works really well when you have a drought because you're creating the only water source out there, and the mosquitoes are drawn right to it. So if you have a lot of rain and there's breeding sites all over the place, it's a little bit tougher. But again, if everybody did it, it would help a lot.
So yeah, normally we end our talk with what can people do to help you out. You've already laid out, call to action number 1 is get on the map. What else can people do? Do you have a donation site or any other ways to help keep your work going?
Yeah, there is a donation button on Homegrown National Park site. It is the only way that we exist, because we don't charge. And we don't charge for a reason. We don't want to pull people away from their existing conservation organizations. We're not trying to compete for membership. We want everybody who's interested in conservation, which needs to be everybody, to engage. And the best way to do that is make it free. So yeah, donations. We live and breathe off of donations. Another great thing is to create a successful model in your neighborhood. Right now there's this opinion, and it's an urban legend, that if you use native plants, you're going to lower property values and your property will be ugly, and everybody will hate you. Landscape design works for native plants as well as non-native plants. I showed you the picture of Pam Carlson's house. It's beautiful. I mean, it's crazy that it has to be ugly if they're native plants. It doesn't. You can make an ugly house with native plants. You can also make an ugly yard with non-native plants. So, and that's one of the reasons I don't say get rid of the lawn. I say reduce the area. The lawn you keep is going to be manicured. It's going to fit right in with our lawn is a status symbol. You don't need to put any products on it. You don't need insecticides. You don't need fertilizer. Just mow it frequently. It's not going to be the area that supports biodiversity, but it will be the area that convinces your neighbor that you understand what the current culture is, and you're part of it. You're not a rebel against it. Line your sidewalk or your driveway with it. The new beds you put in, you line that with lawn. Those are the paths that you will use to walk around your property. So lawn plays a valuable role in your landscape. It's the best plant to walk on without killing it. So we want to use it that way and advertise the fact that we're not being rebels here. We're just trying to live sustainably with the ecosystems that support us.
And I like that goal of reducing it by half, not wipe it out entirely and replace it with wild scraggly natives, but by half. So you've still got a lawn, but you've got the edges where the food sources can live.
Well, that alone is an ambitious goal, but we'll start with half.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much for your time. Really looking forward to helping spread the word. I've already got some ideas of local green teams and other folks that I'm going to try to challenge to get into a competition with each other to see who can get the most onto the map. And I think it'd be a really fun project.
I didn't mention that the states are color coded based on the number of people and the acreage that have been signed up to Homegrown National Park. So you can see where your state is in this national competition. A lot of people are into competition. So
right. And then when you zoom into the state level, you can see by county too, right? Or just find the people in your area.
You can see the people that have signed up. Yeah, not the real names or addresses, but
right.
The fireflies light up. So you can see if your neighbors are on board as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And I just want to remind everybody that, it's a team effort here. And like everything that we always talk about on sustainability now, working together, we can shape a world that works. Thanks again, Doug.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.
Come back, everybody. It's great to have you here. And Scott, you're going to field the questions that are in the Q&A. If you all would like to, please go and check out the questions. You can upvote them if you like. And let's rock and roll. We've got a bunch of questions.
Yep. And it's just a little after 8. Oh yeah, I'll get you. We've got to unmute, ask Doug to unmute. Can you handle that, Mira? Ask Doug to unmute. Okay.
Yeah, I just asked.
Cool. And actually, before we get into the stream of questions, we also have in the crowd here Brandon Huff, who's the executive director of Homegrown National Park. And Brandon, I was hoping maybe you could give a little bit of info about what the organization is. What are the next steps, and where are you headed, to give people a little peek behind the curtain there. And if you could turn your video on, you'll probably pop up to the top of the list here for everybody to see you.
He might not be able to turn his video on. That's a possibility.
There he is. And I don't hear you. Why is that?
He is not muted, it looks like.
I don't think he's got a microphone hooked up, maybe.
Okay.
That's too bad. He's very eloquent.
Oh. Still can't hear you. Maybe we'll take a question for Doug. Sorry, I ambushed you with asking you to talk because it wasn't part of the original script.
Let me know when it works.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I do apologize, everyone. I have a 1.5-year-old whose favorite game is unplugging everything to do with my computer and turning off the computer in the middle of Zoom meetings. So I apologize. I just want to say thank you, Scott. Thank you for the Sustainability Now crew for having Doug on, for letting us have this time to tell you all about what we're doing. Just sincerely appreciate it. And thank you, Doug. For those of y'all who don't know, I am a little bit privy to Doug's schedule. It's just insane. Doug does this so often. It's incredible how generous he is with his time, because he so deeply believes in this mission. So thank you, Doug, for doing this. And again, to Scott and your team for allowing him. Doug's work changed my life. Probably like many of y'all, I saw a book a few years ago, Nature's Best Hope. I liked bluebirds. I saw a bluebird on the cover. It was probably the first book in conservation I read, and it changed my life so rapidly. I had whiplash. I mean, I was Ned Flanders. I was out there, overseeding my lawn. I was fertilizing. Doug, I was fertilizing so hard. And I was very proud of that. But it like I said, whiplash. I've long surpassed E.O. Wilson's goal on our own property with more than half the species changed. So I just want to let y'all know really quick what we're doing. If y'all have been on our website, one of the best resources we put out recently was a container gardening resource. It was viewed over 8 million times on social media by ecoregion. You can click it and download it, and it'll show you keystones in your area that can grow in containers. They can also work in the ground because they're natives, and that's how they work. But if you have, just a patio or balcony, it's going to work for you perfectly. And it's a wonderful resource. It downloads a PDF for you by ecoregion. You can share it with your friends. But I'm very excited to announce in a few weeks, we'll be sharing a updated version, or a new edition, essentially, if you will, with woodies, native trees and shrubs by ecoregion, keystone species. And we're very excited to release that. So please be paying attention for that in the next few weeks. We think it's going to be a tremendous resource. And as was kind of mentioned here, and Doug mentioned, the expenses of the map is definitely, trust me, I see the budget. I definitely have lost sleep over it. We're redeveloping our map, but it's so much more powerful than the one. If you've been with us a while and you've interacted with our map, this one is so much more powerful, so much more beautiful, so much more mobile friendly, easy to use, intuitive, and it's going to allow so much more functionality, especially down the road as we continue to add, new tools to it. We're building a solid foundation. So as Doug mentioned, we can do things like track invasives. We can layer, by property type, whether it's privately owned or government property in the future. We're building the solid foundation for the long term, because we know the value of this as a conservation tool. So that'll be released likely in late November into December. So please be on the lookout for that. And I just want to end on two notes. Is, as Doug mentioned, we are 101% donation driven. So that comes in many forms. It comes in the form of partnerships with native nurseries and businesses who are willing to sponsor us. So if y'all know anyone and you're willing to put us in touch with a business you think would be a great partner or sponsor, we'd love to talk to them. If you know foundations and grants we can apply for, you think that we'd have a strong chance of winning in a grant, I would love to apply for that grant. And lastly, individual donations are the backbone of what we do. 101%. There's no getting around it. Individuals power this movement. So, and money aside, I was, just another person. And then I kind of came into the movement and I became what Doug and our team called the choir. But I transcended that and I became an ambassador, a preacher of the movement. And that's what we're relying on you all. We can have a bunch of people follow us on social media, but what does that mean if you're not out there, planting, and you're not telling your friends and your family about the importance of this movement? So become ambassadors if you're willing for it. If you have the capacity in your life to do that, we would be so thankful. You would be stunned at how much of a difference you can make by talking to your friends, because we're just some Facebook page, some email distro, but they know you, they trust you. And when it comes from you, that really matters. So be willing to talk to your friends about their lawns and their plants on their property, and do it in a way that's not confrontational, because people want to put their defenses up, and give them a chance to understand the importance of this and how they can make really important changes in the world with their actions. So I don't want to steal any more time. Thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out to us on social media or email. We'd love to talk to you. I'm very available. So thank you so much again. And I'm here for y'all, and thank y'all for what you make possible.
Thanks, Brandon. And then one more thing I want to, I'm going to make you all wait a little bit longer for questions, because Doug had introduced me to Sarah Jane, who's, I think you guys are neighbors. And Sarah's writing a book that's going to be a how-to on what a lot of people in this room might know already, but we want to make sure that we can all help Sarah get her book out there as well. So if you could just take a minute or two, explain what you're doing and where that stands.
So it's called Nature's Action Guide, a companion to Doug Tallamy's Nature's Best Hope. And it features 15 different action steps that cover all of Doug's work, and ends up helping people to create wildlife habitats where they live and work. And it's detailed with step-by-step illustrations and lots of resources. It's kind of a whole earth catalog for this movement of sorts. So it's not yet available, but if you are interested in it, it's going to be available through naturesactionguide.com. You can just visit that and let me know, and then I can let you know when it's available. And I'm also happy to answer any wildlife creation questions in the meantime.
Awesome. Can you pop your URL into the chat so people will have it?
Yes.
And just so everybody knows, if you haven't done this before, the chat is savable. So at the end of the meeting tonight, you can go down to the bottom of the chat window and select Save Chat. And everything that anybody has said will be something that you get as a text file, so you can have that resource for later. And for the folks that came in after the beginning, feel free, if you've got a landscaping business or you're a landscape architect or a nursery or whatever, and you want to give a plug to what you're doing to everybody else here, pop your contact information into the chat as well, and that way people will have it. And without further ado, let's get into the questions. So Doug, let's see, we've got 33 questions here, so I'll try to make this quick. They seem to be a little bit, there's a lot of common themes, so I'll try to sift through them and get them down to the basics. So the first one is from Jared O'Connell. He says, I live in southern coastal town in Westport, Connecticut. I've been planting natives for years, but recently a visitor told me that they were not real natives. They may be native in other parts of Connecticut or nearby states, but they are not native to my exact location. Should I be more selective, or are there native plants from nearby areas also good?
Well, native is, whether it's native or not, is really on a continuum. Some people are very strict about it. If it's not within 17 miles, they don't consider it to be native, but that is extreme. You're looking for two things. You're looking for a plant that is part of the food web in which your property lies. And that is a food web that's been very mobile. So as you know, when the glaciers came down, all these food webs moved south and they moved north again. A bird that eats a seed during migration and then flies 300 miles and poops it out, that plant is going to grow 300 miles away from where you are. So what we call provenance, the ability of the plant to survive in a particular location. It's a little bit broader than a lot of people think, but that's one of the considerations. You have to have a genotype that's going to do well where you are. If you're right on the coast, you're going to need genotypes that are good at handling salt. But if it's not, it'll die, and then you'll know you've got to try another one. But when people say it's not a real native, maybe they're talking about cultivars, where it's a genetic slice of the straight species. So that's not the entire genome. It's one that's been accentuated for usually an aesthetic quality. Maybe the flowers are bigger, or a lot of native plants are tall and leggy, so a lot of cultivars are shorter, makes them a little bit easier to use in the landscape. So it's hard to say what your neighbor meant when he said it's not a true native. But so if you plant a plant from Ohio in Connecticut, and it's basically on the same latitude, is your plant going to grow? Probably, no problem. Will it support the insects that are in both places? Yes, it will. Is it going to fit what a purist would want? No. So it's up to you to decide. But I'm not as strict about that as a lot of people think I should be, or some people are. So
cool.
It's a whole lot more native than a plant from China. Let's put it that way.
And I reposted into the chat the Homegrown National Park Native Plant Finder page. So for anybody who's looking to get some advice, definitely start there. There's a lot of links to places where you can look it up by zip code. All right, next up, one of our regulars, Chuck Woolery, has asked to encourage those in our neighborhood to convert some of their lawns to native plant gardens. It would be helpful if your mapping system listed the native plants each home has, and if they are willing to share them with neighbors. The cost of buying natives can be a hurdle for some willing to do it, and to help to build wildlife corridors between the city parks and other nature areas nearby me. We're doing this in Rockville, Maryland, with other cities in Maryland using a mapping app that ideally would be linked to yours. Is this possible?
It's possible. Several things would have to happen. We'd have to have that new version of the map that Brandon was talking about. We'd also have to have permission to put your personal information up on a public site. That's a real stumbling block for a lot of people. So it's not going to happen right now, but it is theoretically possible. That's, bringing up the idea of sharing your native plants is a great one, because often when you get these plants doing well in your yard, they propagate and you end up running out of space. So you have propagules that you can actually share for free with neighbors. And it's a great way to get them interested and find out for themselves that these actually are very, very beautiful plants that are functional as well. So each spring, when you're separating things, dividing them up, think about sharing those divisions with people who don't know anything about it.
Absolutely. And there's a great example of that around the corner from me. I'm in Collingswood, New Jersey, and a woman started something that she calls Suburban Jungle, which is basically some IKEA shelves on the sidewalk in front of her house where she puts little plants out for people to come and take or leave theirs. And it's just a free plant exchange. It turns into vegetable seedlings at different times of the year. I think that next year I'm going to put a concerted effort into turning it into a native plant swap and convincing the folks that are active in that they all want to be overplanting and getting too many in their winter sowing, get too more than they can use so that they can put them out on the plant stand. But it's something that doesn't require a lot of action. I mean, if you've got a local next door app or Facebook group or whatever, and you put a table out in front of your yard with and then make a post that says come get free stuff, and people will do it. And then they may grow out bigger than you've ever imagined. Okay, let's see next. Karen Yates. Is there a priority list for those that have been battling invasives? I've been eradicating tree of heaven. I've almost 8 mature calorie pears, but my woods have been strangled by Japanese honeysuckle. The woods floor is a blanket of winter creeper and chickweed, overrode multiflora and autumn olive. And I will add in my personal nemesis, English ivy. Where do you start?
Start at the edge and work in. I had my own personal priority list. We have, autumn olive and multiflora rose and, some big bushy things that when you take them out, it actually opened up quite a bit of space. So I started with the woodies because it cleared a lot of property. Japanese honeysuckle growing as vine along the ground is really problematic. We didn't, we took the easy ones first. I didn't spend a lot of time with things like garlic mustard and we've got Japanese stiltgrass, which is just impossible. I'm not going to be pulling out every single strand. So I like to start with the woodies. Fortunately, we do not have English ivy. We don't have Japanese knotweed. Those are musts. You've got to get rid of them, but they are tough. So, I would start with the ones that get you excited and make you feel like you've done something rather than the hardest ones that make you feel like shooting yourself. So.
All right. Yeah, ivy is the hardest, I'll tell you that much, unless somebody's got something else that they're running up against, but ivy comes back. All right, anyhow, here's Patty Mueller. We plant native shrubs on our wooded less than an acre property, but the deer browse them heavily and they seldom survive. Any suggestions beyond fencing to increase the survival rate of native shrubs and ward off the deer?
I think until we control our deer, you're going to have to fence it at some level. What I do is I don't call them fences, I call them cages, metal cages, the 5-foot high corrugated wire that they sell at Lowe's or Home Depot. You get a roll of it, and then I can fashion a cage of any diameter that I want, anchored in the ground with a rebar. That's what I put around the things that I want to keep. We've got 10 acres and I'm not going to fence that entire area. So these individual cages, I built cages when we moved in the year 2000, mostly built these in 2001. It's 2023 now. I'm using the same cages. So I just keep moving them around as I add things to the property. When a tree gets big enough or plant gets big enough that it doesn't need to be caged anymore, I remove it and call that graduation day and then move it to another one that does need to be caged. But just hoping that the deer don't eat them anymore is not going to happen. Not until we control our deer.
Absolutely. Okay, Bridget Burbank. I wanted to ask a couple questions about mosquito buckets of doom. And there was a question that came up in the chat about this too. I'll start with the other one that was, do the dunks also kill dragonfly larvae, or is it specific to mosquitoes?
It is specific to aquatic diptera. So mosquito, diptera, or flies. So any aquatic fly in your bucket, but the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is going to be mosquito larvae. Dragonflies, not related at all. And that's the beauty of these mosquito dunks. It's the beauty of Bacillus thuringiensis. It is totally targeted towards what you're trying to kill. There's several formulations of Bacillus thuringiensis. So some are very good at killing caterpillars and some work on beetles. But the one you're getting is focused on aquatic diptera, and your dragonfly would be totally safe. If your dog drinks it, it's totally safe. And that's the beauty of it. You're not killing everything else in order to control your mosquitoes.
Great. And then that leads right into the other question that Bridget had was, are we concerned about native mosquitoes being attracted to these buckets as well? I guess they are. They're all native mosquitoes, right?
Oh, no. We've got Aedes aegypti that's it's introduced. The Asian tiger mosquito is introduced.
All right.
You got several invasive mosquitoes, and they tend to be the most pestiferous ones. But we also have several native mosquitoes. Many of the culex are native. That doesn't discriminate. You're creating an aquatic habitat that many species of mosquitoes love. Not all of them. Some of them are very, very specific. But so yes, you are targeting the mosquitoes in your yard, in your bucket. But I don't know any way around that at this point. Of course, you don't have to kill your mosquitoes. You can swat them, or I suggest turning on a fan. Put it on your picnic table and sit in the breeze, and mosquitoes don't fly into that. So you can enjoy your yard at certain times with just using a fan without killing anything. But if you really are into killing mosquitoes, the dunk is the best way to do it. And most of the ones that are causing the big problems, particularly ones that are very common right now, we're not in September, early October. Asian tiger mosquito. I got bitten 3 times today by an Asian tiger mosquito. So chances are good you're killing an invasive species.
And as a side note to the fan, I can vouch for the fact that they work. We put a ceiling fan on my front porch just so that there wasn't a stagnant space for them to hang out in the shade during the day. And it has definitely drastically reduced the amount of mosquitoes on the porch. All right, let's see. Ash trees. Shelley Nilsson asks, my ash trees have been treated for EAB for years. How does this affect mulching with the leaves and other insects and wildlife? I can't seem to get a firm answer.
Your treated trees are killing everything that uses the ash. So this is a tough situation, because until we get biological control to be more effective than it is right now in killing the emerald ash borer, chances are you will lose your ash. So lose your ash or treat it. But when you're treating it, it's going to be toxic to the sphinx moths. There's actually 95 species of insects that use ash, and it will be toxic to all of them. So that's, this is another one of these trade-offs. How long do the leaves remain toxic when they fall? Well, ash leaves don't last very long, period. They degrade very quickly. It's probably treated with neonicotinoids, and they're very persistent. So that is something you want to think about. But the invasion of the emerald ash borer has been a real challenge for ashes, because most of them have no resistance at all. A little bit of resistance out there, and that we're trying to expand that. But the solution is going to be tiny little wasps that are attacking the eggs and the larvae. There's 3 or 4 species that have been introduced, and they're starting to work. So the object is you treat your tree until these parasitoid populations build up to the point where you actually get good control. And in some places, I think there was a county in New Jersey last year that got almost 80% control. That's really good. So we're moving in the right direction. Not quite there yet, but you're creating a toxic tree when you put neonicotinoids into it.
Yep. Okay. Here's one from Mia Bosna, another of our regulars. Does Doug have any information about how we can get rid of Roundup? Are there any organizations working to stop this product?
A lot of people complain about it, but I don't know if, you're fighting Monsanto and the group. Good luck. You know what? It's herbicides are an effective tool, particularly in terms of controlling invasive plants, but they have to be used properly and not overused. So right now, there's many places where they are overused and they're not used properly. The example of spraying Roundup right up to the road and killing all the weeds just so that you can grow grass. Terrible misuse of that product. But I think of herbicides the way I think of chemotherapy. If you have a tumor in your body, you got to kill it. And you can say, I don't want to kill the tumor. Okay, but the tumor's going to kill you then. And that's the same thing with our invasive plants. If we just let them run wild, they're killing our ecosystems. So how do we control them? Herbicides is one of the tools, but it has to be used properly and with restraint. That's why I don't spray. I paint. If I'm going to get a woody, I sow it off at the base and then just paint a little bit of product on the stump. You've got to kill the root systems. But a lot of people don't want to do that, and that's fine. That's up to you. But I'm not sure it's necessary to ban the entire product. What we need to do is control how it's used.
Yeah. And I know that they've been making a lot of progress in some other countries. So eventually it probably will happen here in the US. We'll see.
I just want to interject that Sarah said beyondpesticides.org is dedicated to replacing pesticides with non-toxic approaches.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And the thing about Roundup is that glyphosate gets into the water table. It's creating all kinds of havoc in human digestive systems, and it has a lot of ramifications. I'm sure that there are other options other than Roundup that we could.
I wouldn't put it in my yard, but yeah, it gets used a lot in our agribusinesses. So it's massive amounts of it are getting dumped into our rivers every year as well. So, okay, let's see. Stephanie Pearson says, many efforts to plant natives are being negated by neighbors and governments spraying pesticides. Without addressing this, I feel like all of our efforts are just luring wildlife to be exterminated. I've planted more natives in my own yard and around my town every year, including monarch way stations. I'm seeing progressively less insects and birds every year. The very few monarchs that I've seen in the last 2 years have been sickened by pesticides that are coming from the neighbors or the county. That's kind of
if I were going to pinpoint one aspect of that, it would be the mosquito foggers. That it's a booming business around the country. It does not control mosquitoes, and it does kill everything else. So that would be the easiest thing. I mean, if I was going to ban something, it would be mosquito fogging right now, because it does not accomplish the goal. It is killing our monarchs. It's killing all of our pollinators. And people think that it's helping. That's the problem. This is misadvertisement. To the companies will say it only kills mosquitoes. That is just, I mean, I'll show you a handful of dead monarchs. It's just not true at all. That's false advertising, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So if your neighbors are fogging, it does float over into your yard. It does impact what you're doing, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. And to have townships doing it without you being able to opt out is not good.
Maybe we could all volunteer to go to the Ace Hardware and buy a sheet of dunks and break them up into smaller containers and offer buckets to our neighbors who are spraying, and say we'll do it for them for free, as opposed to paying somebody else to come.
It'd be a good start. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Amy Oliet says, is there an organization that's trying to educate retail nurseries and landscaping companies to promote more natives, stop selling invasives like English ivy, and reduce the amount of chemicals being sold and to educate their customers? So,
well, that's more or less what Homegrown National Park does. I think all the conservation organizations are pushing these things. So,
okay. Here's Artemis Platts. In southeastern Pennsylvania, it's 60 degrees on October 26th, and the katydids are singing. Has Dr. Tallamy considered how global warming might affect plant ranges? Is there research into this question? Is it something we should consider when we're acquiring new natives?
Yeah, I was just in my yard, and I hear the katydids. I'm in southeast Pennsylvania. It is warm. a little warmer than it ought to be. I think the question is really about assisted migration. Should we be moving plants up from the south in anticipation of warmer times? I'm not a fan of assisted migration for several reasons. The big one is that this is not a gentle warming. Climate change is really increased climate variability. Yes, we have warm spells, but we also have the polar vortex that comes down. Remember, just a few years ago, we had a polar vortex went all the way down into Mexico, right through Texas. It was so cold, it even killed native plants down there. And that's going to happen. We've got a very wobbly jet stream that's allowing these extremes to come and go very rapidly. So climate change is impacting plants. It's impacting insects in negative ways. But what we need to hope is that the plants that exist in our areas have the genetic variability so that they can adapt as best as possible. If we start moving plants up from the south, first of all, we're guessing about what the climate's going to be like in the future. We're moving plants away from the community they co-evolved with. Remember, plants have to do something. We're not just trying to find a plant that's going to grow. We want to find a plant that's going to share its energy. And they do that very poorly when you move them outside their range. So this is controversial. There are a lot of people that think it's great to be moving southern plants up. I'm just not. I don't support that.
All right. And then the next question from Artemis is: are there plans to add invasive removal resources to the Homegrown National Park website? I know that there are a lot of people who are planting natives, but I would, and if side note for me, if anybody's in the Philadelphia area who does invasive removals, reply to the email that got you here. I would love to have you come to my house and help me out.
We'd love to share those resources on our resource page because, yes, that's an important part of it. A lot of people, just like most people don't garden, most people don't go out and saw down their autumn olive or their buckthorn either. They want to hire somebody. So if you're in that business, yes, please advertise with us.
Yeah, I think that you're probably going to find most permaculture and native plant art landscapers probably dabble in both. They're not just planting natives; they also are just providing the service of removing invasives. But I think it's a good resource and something that maybe anybody who provides that service, consider adding that to your promotional materials to call out the fact that you do that as well. Let's see. How do you, Dara Sinclair says, how do you feel about controlled prescribed fire for habitat improvement? Is there a way to mimic the effects of fire without actually having a fire, as many communities are terrified of fires in their area?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the way communities react really depends on where you are. Burning as a management tool is very common in the Midwest. In the prairie states, that's how prairies are maintained. It's far less common in the East, although people do it. I know people in the Midwest who they scratch their heads and wonder why we don't burn more in the East, because it's a very powerful management tool. But my previous neighbor almost burned down the neighborhood trying to do that. So this is why a lot of people don't do it. Has to be done by skilled fire managers. The fire department has to be informed. There are people that do it. There are people that do it all the time, and they can be very successful in terms of doing it. It's one of the tools we teach at the University of Delaware. But most people in the East don't burn. I've got a meadow. I would love to burn it. It's more trouble than it's worth in terms of getting permission. And I'm not a qualified burner, and it'd be hard to get equipment to, so I don't. So what do you do in that case? Well, mowing can be an effective substitute. It's not as good. When you burn, you're turning plant material into ash, which then nourishes the soil. Burning naturally also burns patchily. If a little piece doesn't burn, you don't go back and burn that again, because those unburned sections are where the biodiversity has survived. Nothing survives a burn. So your meadow landscape has to be recolonized when you burn, and that's why you let it go naturally so that you have areas that don't burn. You can mimic that with a mowing schedule. And what's suggested is that you mow a third of your prairie or your meadow every year, so that any one section only gets mowed once every 3 years. So a third, do it in patches. That's even better. So that 2/3 each year won't be mowed or won't be burned. And that will be your source of organisms to colonize the area that was treated. Mowing is not as good as burning, but it's much better than doing nothing. I also throw out there that mowing is not the way to control woody invasives that have come into your meadow. Particularly in the east, meadows are transitional habitat. When we get enough rain that woodies want to come in and turn it into a forest, and unless it is managed, unless it's grazed, unless it was kept open by Pleistocene mammals, the big things that caused a lot of disturbance and kept meadows open, it will return through succession to a forest habitat. Unfortunately, what comes in now first is all those woody invasives, the autumnal and the multiflora rose and the porcelain berry and all those things that we don't want. So spot treating those, and a mattock is a great way to go. If you don't want to fool with herbicides, get a mattock. It's like a pickaxe with a broad end, and just whack out that young plant. Only takes 1 or 2 whacks per plant, and you can keep it controlled without having to mow for controlling. Mowing doesn't kill the rootstocks, which means it just comes right back.
Yep. I heard somebody described a yard that they had rehabbed where they spent 3 years mowing it flat every year, and then decided to do the natives after that to try to combat the invasives and wipe them out entirely before they started the new project.
But it doesn't work because it doesn't kill the rootstocks.
Right.
You can mow forever and they just keep coming back.
Gotcha. Okay, here's Chuck Woolery again asking about, instead of buying mosquito dunks, his suggestion is he keeps a clean water trap by his front door and checks it every day when leaving the house. If there are any larvae in there, he dumps them out and starts over again. But now he's going to start putting straw in it to draw more mosquitoes.
Yeah, dumping it out on the ground will certainly work. And if you're religious about checking it, repeatedly dumping it out, it will work. When you put the organic material in there, it creates algae and diatom blooms, and that's what mosquito larvae eat. So it becomes much more attractive than just plain water. Mosquitoes will oviposit in water whenever they get the chance, but you want to draw the mosquitoes to your bucket so that they're not laying their eggs anyplace else. And they will preferentially lay eggs in a bucket that has the organic material in it. You can dump that out too, or you can put the mosquito dunk in, and you don't have to check it every day.
Right. How about like putting those dunks out in like puddled areas near where you live that are just naturally puddling from poor drainage? Right.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Don't in a real wetland, don't do that, because there's a lot of aquatic diptera in there that are part of that ecosystem. But a huge source of mosquitoes that people don't think about are the sewers in your streets. The water goes down into that, and they drain kind of, but there's usually an inch or two of water in the bottom there, and a lot of mosquitoes are breeding down there, and nobody even thinks about that. So throw a few dunks down there as well, and that'll help.
I like it. Little dunk bombs in the sewers.
Mm-hmm.
Artemis says, can you comment on the need for responsible targeted herbicide use for invasives? I think we already got that one. Next up, Doug Cowan, neighbor and friend of mine. Many property owners cannot afford labor and materials needed to convert their lawn into instant native landscape, particularly a large scale. Are there any well-documented case studies utilizing secondary succession, letting defined lawn areas go, knowing, however, that some level of maintenance is nevertheless going to be required with mowing and burning and invasive species removal? Related to this, are the prairie strips you discussed created by simply letting it go, or planting new plantscapes?
All right, I'll start with that one. The prairie strips are planted because you're talking about converting agricultural fields. If you let it go, there's not the seed stock there. So they're planted with pollinator-friendly plants, and so that you get it right away. You don't have to wait years. Larry Weiner will tell you that you can add a lot of native plants to your landscape. It's called addition by subtraction, by simply removing the plants you don't want and adjusting your mowing schedule. So if you mow heavily in the spring and then don't mow the rest of the year, this meadow situation, you're going to push the species composition away from cool season European grasses towards warm season bunch grasses, and some of the forbs will start coming in as well. So Larry says you can actually push it to a native meadow without planting anything. It's going to take a couple of years, though, of that type of a mowing schedule.
Great. The local clover seems to have taken over my yard, and I've decided that I don't mow those areas anymore. Wherever the clover is, it gets to stay. The bees seem to love it.
Well, you can also, raise the mower blade.
Mm-hmm.
Raise it, 3 or 4 inches, and you go right over the clover. You'll get some of the flowers, but it's very good at handling that, and it'll bloom again. So,
cool. Here's a question: what are you working on currently? I guess beyond Homegrown National Park.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm finishing up another book, trying to. I was told I have to cut 60,000 words, so I'm working on that. I've got 2 graduate students. They're working on their own research. Actually, I got 3 graduate students. We're trying to document what the best landscape under trees actually is, so that we can get the highest survivorship of those caterpillars that drop from the trees and are pupating underground. Compacted soil is the enemy. We know that. So what kind of landscape is going to loosen up that soil? What type of mulch? Do you need shrubby plants or ground cover? I've got a grad student, Emma Jonas, working on that. Another grad student, Aaron Hunt, is looking at, I say if you plant particularly keystone plants, no matter where you put them, the moths will come and you'll have a viable food web. But nobody's ever tested that. So he's actually testing that by looking at the moth community on different landscape types, from an urban situation on gradients all the way out to rural situations. He's wrapping up his work so that we can actually have some numbers saying, yeah, if you plant that oak tree even in the middle of Boston, it is going to support some moth communities. And another student is working on those parasitoids of the emerald ash borer. The news is good there. There's a lot of success coming out of that lab. So cool. Those are the things and I'm also thinking about retiring one of these days.
That's why we all need to step up.
Yeah, that's right. Get ready.
The compacted soil, is that testing plants with deeper root structures to try to break up the soil that way, or using mechanical systems to do it manually?
A normal winter will break up the soil. The problem is we keep compacting it by walking on it and mowing. So mowing under your trees, you get that, I don't know how big our big riding mowers, how much they weigh. Emma knows. But that you ride over, you've compacted the soil, particularly if you mow when it's wet, and we keep recompacting it. If you stop doing that and put some plants in there, almost anything starts to break up that soil pretty quickly. You can, when you get really serious compaction, there's a structure called a ripper. You actually put it behind that mower, or you get a real tractor, and it's this big tine, and you just drag it through the ground, and it really breaks up the compaction. But you don't have to do that to get the caterpillars down. You just have to stop compacting it.
Right. Cool. And this one came up in the chat earlier, but now here it is in the Q&A. How can Canadians get on the map? From Susan Boyd.
Canada is part of HNP. You can get on the map right now.
I think I put the link in a while ago. It's probably way up in the chat, but yeah.
It is our only international effort right now. Is Canada's been added. We would like to include every country in the world, but we're not quite there yet. But Canada's there. Canada's on the map.
So everyone in Canada, get on there so we can claim it's really international. Let's expand that map up there. Okay, this one came up in the beginning of the meeting. It might have been before you came on. We were talking about the burning bush. The person's name here is Bruce Yates, but I know that that's the husband that's being talked about. My husband really wants a burning bush. Please help me convince him to get something else.
I don't know where they live, but Gee whiz. From here, I'm in Southeast PA. The farther north you get, the more burning bush is an issue in our natural areas. And of course, it turns red in the fall, and that's why everybody likes it. So you can drive through Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York State, look into the natural areas. It's all red, and it'll give you an idea of how much burning bush has spread. If you look at those little teeny seeds, little berries on burning bush seeds, each bush makes hundreds of thousands of those seeds. A bird will eat it, fly away, and poop it out, and that's why it's so highly invasive. So it's banned. You can't buy it in Delaware. There's a lot of states you can't buy it because of its invasive qualities. So don't let your husband do it.
I hope you're still here. Is there a forum for NWF Native Plant Finder in which we can share hints, discoveries, and problems and feature requests? So that would be over there on the National Wildlife link that's
Right.
Available.
I don't know if they have something like that, but I actually talked to somebody from NWF yesterday. He's a real go-getter. If you've got an issue and a suggestion for the Native Plant Finder, send it to me and I'll send it to him. He'll get it done.
Awesome. Okay, Janet Broderick says, is it okay to mulch the leaf fall back into the lawn? So I guess that would be with the mower, I guess.
Mower, yeah, chop it all up. If I showed you the number of cocoons, the moths that create the caterpillars that run the food web that are in those leaf litter, you wouldn't want to run it through your mower. Some of them are gorgeous, like the Luna moth and some of the other beautiful things. A lot of them are tiny, but you are destroying the existing wildlife in that leaf litter when you mulch it. You're also shortening the lifespan of those leaves. So when you chop it all up, they break down much faster, and they may not make it through the summertime. You've got to keep that blanket on your soil all year long, because it maintains the moisture that protects the soil community. There are more species that live in the soil than above the soil, and they're transferring the nutrients to your trees. So chopping up the leaves is it's better than raking them and sending them off site, because you at least get the nutrients that were in those leaves. But you lose at least two of the very valuable ecological services of your leaves when you mulch them like that.
How thick can you let your leaves get before it starts to be detrimental to what's underneath it?
A normal layer of leaves.
So just whatever
Now,
falls
if you
off the
pile
tree.
them up 5 feet thick, you're going to prevent things from growing there. But the leaf layer that falls from a single tree does not prevent the plants from coming up. And I've got lots of photos to demonstrate that.
Cool. Because in my yard, they often tend to blow around and pile up to where they're a foot or so thick in some spots, and then
Right. If that happens in my yard too, they'll blow against the house, and you will get 2 feet of leaves over my phlox bed. I do have to rake that away because it's the house that's blocking it, and that's not a normal layer. But
right.
in a typical situation, you're getting a layer of leaves, and the plants have no trouble getting through that.
As long as you're only a couple inches thick, you don't cross over like a foot or something, we should be pretty good.
Foot would be too much.
Elaine Melito is back on the mosquitoes thing. Do we want to kill all the mosquitoes? What about the bats and other animals that live on mosquitoes? I certainly don't like mosquitoes, but is there an eradication a concern?
Yeah, if you killed all the mosquitoes, it would be a problem. Mosquitoes as larvae are a critical part of aquatic ecosystems. They're the food that so many of the predators, from fish to all the aquatic hemipteras that are in our wetlands, that's what they eat. They eat mosquito larvae. And you're right, the swifts, the bats, the dragonflies, they're eating adult mosquitoes too. So they are part of the ecosystem that's out there. There's an article today, I think, in the New York Times about how dengue, which is a mosquito spread disease spread by Aedes aegypti, is spreading around the world. It's going to scare everybody. Oh, we got to kill every single mosquito. So it's a trade-off. Mosquitoes do transmit diseases, not nearly as many in the US as in other parts of the world. But they're also a critical part of our ecosystem. So it's that balance that we're trying to seek.
Okay, here's Doug Cowan asks, are there current reliable cost benefit data that might bring to bear in support of lower maintenance natural landscapes versus manicured grass? For example, a comparative cost per acre, especially the so-called chem lawns that are prevalent in the suburbs. Given the urgency in the face of habitat loss, climate change, etc., we need to incentivize change on a massive scale, and it seems like economics would be a major catalyst.
Yeah, it's a good argument. There's a guy who has a business in Illinois, Jack Pizzo. I think it's Pizzo and Associates, who does big time prairie restorations on corporate landscapes and whatnot. And he has these data. He says this is what it costs to mow this number of acres. This is what it costs to maintain it in your typical way. This is what it costs to hire me, Jack Pizzo, to convert it. And he's got it all figured out, the number of years that will go by. And by the way, he maintains it every year too. It's all part of his business plan. So if you were to email Jack Pizzo and say, can you give me some of these numbers? He'd probably be happy to.
Well, how do you spell his last name?
I think it's Pizzo.
All right. I'm going to type that in the chat, so anybody who saves the chat later will have it. And you can Google it yourself, what his website is. Let's see. Maybe linking, Christine Bradoff says, maybe linking to iNaturalist somehow would work for recording wildlife at our sites.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. That's what iNaturalist is for. And if you don't know something that's showing up on your property, take a picture of it and post it on iNaturalist. You'll get an answer right away.
Yeah, maybe there's a partnership somewhere down the road where iNaturalist can be the source of data that feeds into the Homegrown National Park records.
It could, if everybody was religious in recording what they had. iNaturalist is much bigger than I ever thought it was. It's worldwide, and there's millions and millions and millions of records on iNaturalist. It's a wonderful resource.
Totally. Let's see. Sonia Harmon says, can a native plant also be an invasive plant?
No. Because the definition of invasive is non-native organism that's displacing native organisms. So you can have an invasive plant, you can have an invasive insect, you can have an invasive crayfish. It's when they're taking over and destroying local native communities. So that's the definition. Now you can have an aggressive native plant that grows quickly. And there are aggressive native plants. They're wonderful when you're trying to fight invasive species, because then it's more of an equal competition. But invasive native or aggressive native plants have been duking it out with other native plants for millions of years. They are used to each other. They're part of the system. Nothing's out of whack there. The problem with invasive plants in particular is we brought them over here without any of their natural enemies, and that includes the vertebrates that eat them. So, for example, our white-tailed deer do not eat our invasive plants, and it's one of the major reasons they are so invasive, because the deer eat all the natives. They leave the burning bush and the barberry and the autumn olive and all those things. So, of course, that's what's there. That's what takes over. These plants we think are such wonderful competitors. They're wonderful competitors because the deer are eating all the things they would be competing against. When you actually cage out the deer, when you fence them out, and let our natives compete with these invasives, they're quite competitive.
Absolutely. I guess one geography's natives is another geography's invasives.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny you say the aggressive natives. I put common milkweed in my yard, 3 stalks a couple years ago, and we didn't think they were going to take it all. And then the next thing we knew, we got about 30 square feet of it. It's
oh, the monarchs are going to be happy.
Yes, we've got a big patch of that. So, in fact, one of the things we're doing after this, we're going to send an email out encouraging everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we've got a zero waste kit that we're giving away as an incentive. And anybody else who signs up who would like some common milkweed seeds, we'll throw those in as well, because I've got lots. But be forewarned, they will spread. Okay, let's see. It is 9 o'clock, and I know we asked you to stay until 9. So are you able to stick around for a little longer, or we want to honor your time and let you go if you have And
Let's
then
say five more minutes. I've got to be up at 4 tomorrow morning and hit the road.
Okay. Well, let's make it a last question here. And we're going to go with Amy Johnson. We have an acre of grass we want to convert to a meadow. I was considering raising honeybees, but am concerned it would create too much competition for native pollinators. But I like honey. What are your thoughts, and can we find a balance?
I hope we can find a balance. We are becoming much more aware of the degree to which honeybees do compete with our native bees. Now, in landscapes of old, where we had a lot more forage, there were a lot more blooming plants out there than there are now. People that looked at that concluded that the competition wasn't very severe. But, a single successful honeybee hive that we supplement all winter long, we feed them when there's not much forage. It can have tens of thousands of individual bees in there. They can forage up to 2 miles away from that hive. And they're getting to an awful lot of those blooming plants before our natives do, our native bees. So the competition is real. Honeybees are important for several forms of our agriculture because they're such good pollinators over such long distances. But the hobbyists who are raising honeybees just because it's fun or they want to get a little honey are impacting local native bee populations. And, I really wish it weren't so. I like honey too. But is there balance? I'm sure there is somewhere, but it depends on how many people are raising bees around you, because they have just draw a 2-mile radius around every single hive and you can see what that coverage is.
All right. Good stuff. So, Doug, thank you so much for what you're doing. And everybody who showed up here tonight, you are the ones that are going to make this happen. Doug can't do it all, so he needs us each to pick up the slack and get out there and keep spreading this word to everybody that we know, because that's really what's going to make the difference, is talking to your neighbors and making sure that the word gets out there.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Scott. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Doug. Scott, can we share Doug's links again and our links in the chat?
I'll pop them all in the chat here. And everybody that's still here, as a reminder, you can save the chat on a desktop. It's at the bottom of the chat window, the 3 dots that say more. You can hit the save chat button there. I don't remember where it lives on the phone, but feel free to figure that out. Or you can reply to the email and ask me for it, and I'll send it to you sooner or later.
And so many of you are new with us. We invite you to join us for future movie nights. We do this every Thursday night from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, and we have a wide-ranging variety of topics. And it would be wonderful to be having you be part of our growing community.
Yep. And as an example, our next week is the AI week, or no?
Yeah, I think next week is how AI is being used to create interspecies communication, which is, or to start to understand it, which is pretty exciting. So I see somebody has a raised hand. Scott, are we going to do anything with that right now, or?
Like it went away. I don't know who it was.
Okay, I think we're past time.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Sarah, and everybody who's joined us.
And we look forward to seeing you all again some Thursday night soon. We're here every week at this time. You'll be on the email list, so watch out for announcements of what's coming up next.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.